Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy T for 365 Horror, and this is a horror movie discovery channel. I am just here to put as many horror movies on your watch list as possible. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at every single movie I watched in January 2024, and we're going to get into it right now. Now, we are going to get into the video, but before we do, I've got to remind you guys to please like and subscribe if you like this content. Also, this video is best watched with a movie tracker. I like to use Letterboxd. It's just the easiest way to keep track of the movies that you've seen and want to see. And with that, let's get right into the movies. Okay, the first movie I watched was a 2004 comedy horror mystery by the name of Club Dread, and the final score I gave that movie was a 5 out of 10. Club Dread unfortunately has not aged well. It's good for some chuckles, but not much else. I did love the cast since I did love the movie Super Troopers, and I think my enjoyment of the movie back in the day had something to do with that. On the other hand, at this point, this movie is just a mediocre slasher with some good jokes and not much else. The next movie I watched was a 2023 horror mystery thriller by the name of Thanksgiving, and I gave that movie a 7 out of 10. Thanksgiving is a good horror film. It really does encompass everything you'd want from a good whodunit slasher. It's got good raunchy comedy, which really made the comedic element enjoyable. I also thought it had a great whodunit type setup, with the Thanksgiving tragedy and everyone having their part to play, giving plenty of motives for revenge. I even loved how they established the setting by adding little elements like them handing out the killer's costume as part of a Halloween event. It has a great variety of kills with a good variety of weapons, while mixing a macabre element of the victims being propped up like table decorations at a Christmas table. This was a good movie, and I could see it making it to my collection. The next movie I watched was another 2023 comedy horror mystery, and that was called Sleep, and I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Sleep is a good to decent movie for sure. I'm surprised that they called this one a comedy horror, but I guess I could see where some of the humor came from. Personally, I felt the movie had decent tension, and it did a good job of giving me a very anxious feeling when it came time for the husband to go to sleep each night. And the very sound of his snoring almost becomes panic-inducing by the end of the film. I also love the juxtaposition they gave the character, because in the day he was so nice and unassuming and genuinely caring, but at night when he wasn't in control, it was just such a different story. It really made me root for the main characters of this movie to kind of figure it out, because I found the main character, her dread was just so palpable. The movie also had a great air and sense of dread every night when he would fall asleep. This is a decent foreign film watch. Next movie I watched was a 2023 comedy horror drama called Beau Is Afraid, and I gave it a 5.5 out of 10. Okay, so Ari Aster, he made Hereditary, Midsommar, and now Beau Is Afraid. This was his weird movie. So say it again. Hereditary, Midsommar, and now Beau Is Afraid. That being said, I did love his first two movies, but unfortunately I didn't love Beau Is Afraid. Now that doesn't mean that this movie doesn't have its good elements, so let's start with some of the good. The movie did have a good dark humor infused into the movie's many uncomfortable, gut-wrenching moments. It also had a very curious plot wherein early on you're sensing something isn't right, and it gets your mind really working trying to make sense of and figure out what's going on. The characters were really well played, even some of the children. This movie for me was just very weird, and not in a good way, but kind of weird without direction. If you like a movie that doesn't really have a set plot, then this might be something that you like, just something very weird and scattered. But for me, it did have direction, but I just felt that throughout it kind of lacked it. It does culminate and wrap up into something, so you do kind of get a fully told narrative. It isn't just pointless, but a lot of the middle point just had me scratching my head. Now again, if you're the type of person who just likes very weird, avant-garde, random movies, then you will love Beau Is Afraid. Next movie I watched was a 2022 comedy horror romance named Attachment, and I gave that movie a 5.5 out of 10. Attachment is a meh movie with some minor creeps and scares. Although I did enjoy its subtle brand of comedy, it's just a slower burn and did tend to feel fairly anticlimactic. Weirdly, a shining point of this movie is the relationship, which I felt was well acted and it felt authentic throughout the whole movie. I wish they would have continued with the humor throughout, but about halfway through this movie, I felt like the movie just started to take itself a little too seriously and was just way too slow in progressing the story. If you're in the mood for a romance that actually does have some okay creeps and scares, check this one out. The next movie I watched was a 2006 comedy horror thriller called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and I gave this movie a 5 out of 10. The Rise of Leslie Vernon, unfortunately in 2024, was just kind of a meh movie. I feel like I would have actually gotten more out of the film in 2006, but watching it today, it most like just the production value, the characters, the music, it did feel a little bit dated. You could just feel it in the humor and acting. The acting didn't feel bad per se, just dated. And the jokes got a couple of chuckles, but that's about it. Now, it did have a decent premise, following a slasher villain while he went through the steps of how they plan their big night, leaving you with a very meta film look at slasher films. And that original angle did save the movie, even though I was looking at it through a 2024 lens. This movie would have scored a little bit higher, but there's just zero creeps and scares, and even the gore for being a slasher just left a lot to be desired. I want to say that if you're into horror comedies, you may get more from this one, but I'm just not so sure. The next movie I watched was a 2023 drama horror mystery by the name of Adalynn, and I gave this movie a 6 out of 10. Adalynn is an okay movie with a couple of good elements. Right from the onset, you could tell the production and acting is subpar, just with the camera angles and some of the dialogue. The biggest problem with the acting being subpar is that the story is about postpartum depression. So the main character does a lot of sobbing and crying, which tends to be one of the harder emotions to really nail on screen. Now, she does an okay job, like I didn't want to turn the movie off, but it wasn't exactly a masterclass in the portrayal of a tormented soul. What did save the movie from just a 5 out of 10 fate, because it is just an okay film, was the fact that the dread and the psychotic break in this movie starts early. The baby moments, which could be filled with anxiety and tension, can also be disturbing, and her conversations with friends and family do sound authentic from a breaking mind. Now, this movie does actually attempt to creep you out and scare you, it just does a subpar job of it. I do think I felt something once, and I jumped a bit once, but that's about it. Lastly, I'll finish off by saying I did enjoy where the plot went and the ending. It really did save the movie. Next movie I watched was a 2023 horror thriller by the name of Suitable Flesh, and I gave this movie a 6 out of 10. Suitable Flesh is a decent movie that most def has its good and bad. Starting with the good, it has a decent story along with decent production and a good cast. It's definitely heavy on the thriller because I found it lacked creeps and scares. If you're into it, it definitely has a late 90s, early 2000s feel when it comes to a lot of the music and cinematography choices in the movie. The movie does have some good gore and really bloody moments, although not a lot of it. Also, after watching, I was surprised that this is just a horror thriller and doesn't really have romance in there. I mean, it's got a weird twisted romance angle, and let me tell you, this movie can get spicy for sure. Its generous amount of sex scenes are often accompanied by classic, sultry, almost Kenny G-like jazz music, which was an interesting choice for sure. Where this movie lacked was with some of the characters. Not in some of the overacted scenes, mostly the seizing scenes, but more so in the dialogue and direction choices. A lot of the character actions had me puzzled and seemed more thrown in just to drive the plot. I wasn't exactly yelling at the screen, it was just puzzling. I'd say this movie was just something to watch. Next movie I watched was a 2018 action fantasy horror by the name of Mandy, and I gave this movie a 7 out of 10. Mandy is a good sci-fi revenge film. The characters are well acted, and I thought Nicolas Cage did a decent job, save a few cheesy scenes. This movie has a top-notch avant-garde weirdness for sure, but don't let that scare you at all. The story is still quite straightforward and cohesive. The movie is paced decently, but did drag a little bit in the third act. It's also visually stunning at times. The cinematography is really good in this movie, and it jumps between film styles at times, and it kept the movie feeling interesting and unique. Gore-wise, this movie delivers plenty of instances where it's just copious rivers of blood, coupled with some pretty brutal kills. If you don't mind something that's a little bit out of the box, Mandy is worth a watch and is a movie I would add to my collection. Next movie I watched was a 2020 straight horror by the name of Cupid, and unfortunately, I only gave this movie a 3 out of 10. Unfortunately, Cupid just isn't a good movie. Although it has a decent bloody start, the acting and plot hold this movie back in a big way. Watching it, you could maybe get some enjoyment in a this is so bad it's funny kind of way, but for me, it was just a waste of time. Honestly, this movie is a 2, but I did somewhat enjoy some of the practical effects, and it had some good bloody and gross moments. I could tell they were really trying to make something raw here, just something lacked in the execution. To top it off, this movie has 0 creeps and scares. In my opinion, one to avoid. Next movie I watched was another 2023 straight horror called 15 Cameras, and I gave this movie a 6.5 out of 10. 15 Cameras is a good film, just extremely light on the creeps and scares. It definitely starts out on a different note, and the movie almost morphs before your eyes on what it is and what you think it will be. It has a good story that intrigued me and just kept me guessing and wondering where it was going to end up. The characters were well acted, and some of their interactions are so authentically awkward, it's palpable. There's a few little jump scares mixed with quite a bit of sneaking around tension that did hit well, especially in some of the surveillance scenes. Again, I would totally give this movie a better score, but as someone who was in it for the creeps and scares, it just didn't really deliver in that department. Honestly, I feel like even if we got some really raw moments in the surveillance, it could have made the movie darker and therefore for me more enjoyable. Regardless, this is a good movie that's worth the watch as long as you're not trying to be creeped out or scared. The next movie I watched was a 2023 fantasy horror called Dark Harvest, and I gave the movie a 5.5 out of 10. Dark Harvest is a middle-of-the-road film with some good elements. It has a quick start and a fairly unique premise, which also does become a little predictable and cliche by the end, but it still kind of drew me in as I pieced it together. This movie has competent acting and above average production, which it needed because it is a 50s, 60s period piece. I appreciated it because I did feel the greaser era and it stayed true to the time period. Now, you see Sawtooth Jack early on and the CGI on him is just okay. But what I did like was the amount of gore. Although it wasn't buckets of blood, there are some good, gross, bloody moments. Not a ton of creeps or scares in this one, as I did find it more of like a Purge/Hunger Games with kids in the 50s. Not a bad watch if you have nothing else to watch. The next movie I saw was a 2016 drama horror by the name of Raw, and I gave this film a 7.5 out of 10. Raw is a really good film. It has a great engaging story with a subtle dark comedy that I really enjoyed. It has great production and solid character performances. The devolution of the main character into her true self is raw and visceral, giving you a great feel for what the character goes through. Although not scary or creepy, you get a lot of this palpable tension between the characters in a number of their interactions. It has some great awkwardness to it at times, and lots of jaw-dropping moments. Not only that, but you do get a generous amount of gore and blood, as well as some pretty gross moments. Lastly, finish it off with a good ending, and you have yourself a really good movie. Raw is a movie I would suggest to anyone, and it will eventually find itself in my collection. The next movie I watched was a 2001 horror mystery sci-fi by the name of Pulse, and I gave this movie a 6 out of 10. Pulse is actually a really creepy movie. I actually regret that I didn't get a chance to watch it back in 2001. Honestly, this movie would have gotten a 7 or an 8 back then, it just didn't hold up as much as I'd like. A lot of the camera footage scenes are still pretty creepy, and this movie still has one of the scarier scenes in which a woman silently walks across the room, which still hits fairly well. The problem with the movie lies in the premise itself, which doesn't hit like I think it would have in 2001. The internet was still kind of on the rise back then, so a movie about loneliness and death traveling through the internet may have hit a little bit harder, and would have actually made me a little bit nervous to go online for a bit. The way The Ring made me nervous to watch like unmarked VHS tapes. Today I just looked at it like, do you mean to be afraid of the same internet that I watched the movie on? That I used to write the review, record, upload it, and then you guys watch it? You mean that internet? The same internet here in my pocket that I use almost every second of every day? So in that regard, I really think the premise would have scared me a lot back then. Other than that, the movie does a really good job of portraying something bleak, and the musical score really does add to the bleak and creepiness of the movie. And I could tell that would have really grated on my nerves back in the day. All in all, this movie is a good old school watch. The next movie I watched was a 2014 drama horror romance called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and the final score I gave this movie was a 6.5 out of 10. A Girl Walks Home is a pretty decent film with good to great elements in it. Alright, sorry if the scene changed a little bit. Someone showed up at the door, so I just had to take a break. So I feel like I moved and everything probably looks different, or maybe my voice sounds different. I'm not too sure. But we are just going to keep going. So the next movie I watched was a 2014 drama horror romance by the name of A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and I gave this movie a 6.5 out of 10. A Girl Walks Home is a pretty decent film with good to great elements in it. Although light on the creeps and scares, I'm sure this is not supposed to be a high-octane horror. This movie is definitely a slow burn. What it does well is in the cinematography, in which it provides a lot of scenes and shots in which the black and white element was shot well and still had a good depth to it. Mix that with this musical score, which feels very integral to the film, and you have a well-woven narrative-driven story. The romance in the movie felt different and had good tragedies within it. If you're in the mood for a more avant-garde drama horror, this movie is definitely worth the watch. Last movie I watched this month was a 2024 comedy horror called Destroy All Neighbors, and I gave the film a 5 out of 10. Destroy All Neighbors had a promising start but quickly devolves into a ridiculous, zany comedy. Not a total loss, the movie does have a funny, undiscovered musician narrative that is spot on and I relate to. It also has some good raunchy humor. Unfortunately for me, it quickly loses its way and the movie quickly turns into entrails playing the drums in his undead band. If you're a fan of zany, quirky horror movies, you definitely might get more out of this prog rock classic, but for me, unfortunately, it was a bit of a miss. Well, guys, that's going to do it for another one of these every single horror movie I watched in a month. I hope you guys enjoyed following along and were able to get some great movies for your watch list. Before I get out of here, I just want to thank you guys. We finally hit 1,000 subscribers, and I appreciate each and every one of you, and I appreciate the people who comment. Even if you don't agree with me, at least we're getting to have a bit of a discussion and watch some really good horror movies. I've been suggested some good movies down in the comments. Hopefully I've suggested some good movies, and hopefully we can just keep rolling. So if you do like this content, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.